There should be single points of entry and exits out of schools, along with armed guards and metal detectors put in place immediately while this debate rages on. How many mass shootings have there been on airplanes? We should employ similar safety methods to protect our children, and we should do so immediately. The thing about people who want to take our right to bear arms away is that they don't acknowledge that the reason we have that right is that our founding fathers knew of the corruptive force of government agencies, and that citizens need leverage against those forces, which in many cases happens to be being armed. It's fair enough to have the conversation, and it's fair enough to question things. The tragedy and the insanity that is at our doorstep far too often obviously needs to be addressed. The conversation is a valid one, and of course, all our hearts go out to the kids who lost their lives and the parents who lost their children. As a parent myself, I cannot fathom what they are going through, and my heart truly bleeds for them. And those aren't just empty words. However, we live in a world that is bent over backwards to usurp our God-given rights, led by government institutions which displayed cartoonish levels of manipulation and fear-inducing insanity, who have threatened our First Amendment, lied to us continually, and done everything possible to break trust completely, even immediately politicizing this horrific event, and leaning into the rhetoric we all knew was coming. Maybe they could have given it a couple days, especially if they wanted to be smart about it. We can't pretend that their motivations are really about the safety of our children. As I started out giving a simple and effective solution which prevented these things happening on planes. We can't pretend their motives are pure if we are even vaguely awake to their behavior around anything that relates to the empowerment and sovereignty of its citizens. When you have jokesters like Whoopi Goldberg campaigning for neighbors to spy on each other and call the cops if they suspect they are armed, which in America it is still their right to be, that's anti-American rhetoric. That's a page straight out of Nazi Germany, neighbors spying on each other and turning each other over as if we didn't already live in an environment spinning out of control with division and fear, which when you think about it, does nothing to prevent the atrocities that have happened in our schools. It's all related. The Second Amendment. Our Constitution isn't an outdated rag. Our Constitution is an ordained document which is the literal foundation of our country. It's not negotiable. People say the solution is simple, just hand over your guns. But they're ignoring just about all of human history. They cite Australia, ignoring the intense levels of tyranny that country keeps enduring, which, like it or not, is related. Free speech isn't negotiable, and nor is the right to bear arms. Have the conversation, but don't ignore a big part of what the conversation is about. We don't trust the government, and the government has been acting about as trustworthy as a drug dealer in Times Square on some back street that tells you to give him a wad of cash and trust him that he'll be back soon with your bounty. Yeah, right. The government would say, just give us your guns. We promise not to mess with your freedom. Yeah, right. That's actually even more laughable than the first example. In the Times Square example, it's unlikely that you'll ever see that guy again, but you may be pleasantly surprised. In the second example, say goodnight. Tulsi Gabbard acknowledged something needs to be done to deal with these mass shootings, and she's right. One, entry and exit out of schools, an armed guard, metal detectors. More awareness that many of these people perpetuating these heinous acts are medicated. So more investigation into that would be welcome. More awareness of those dangers. And yes, you're not crazy to consider the possibility of government involvement for the purpose of creating an atmosphere like the one we are in now, of heavy emotion, tremendous division, and the new weight behind the message of disarming its citizenry. And the speed as to how fast that message is being delivered, it doesn't make you a nut job to ask the question, especially with warnings we've had from such people as Bill Cooper, who wrote Beyond the Pale Horse and predicted a rise in school shootings for exactly this reason. He was later shot for his trouble, so nothing to see here, folks. And I'm not saying that this is how it is at all. I'm not saying that. I'm saying if we are going to have the conversation, let's have the whole conversation without screaming at each other and calling each other names. Really, now we should just be spending our time and our prayers to the family and to the little angels who have gone to heaven far too soon. All our hearts and minds should be on them and not pollute that space with insane debate. Surely that can wait at least a day or two. Obama squeezing in his condolences with a tweet about George Floyd. You have to shake your head at the insanity of that. Now, you could scream at me and call me names for stating this opinion, but here it is in a nutshell. It doesn't come from not caring about human life or our children. It's the opposite. And wanting to be a redneck and running around in the woods chasing animals, it doesn't come from that either, though that does sound fun. It comes because an unarmed America, in my opinion, will lead to insane amounts of bloodshed, including children, from a government whose will is to control by any means necessary. They have shown me that over the last few years. They have shown their hand, just as the globalists have shown their hand the world over. We see what happens in other unarmed countries, and we are just at the beginning. People sometimes say our founding fathers would not still support the Second Amendment in this current modern world, but I beg to differ. It wasn't about muskets versus AR-15s. It was about the government fearing its citizens rather than the other way around. There is no doubt in my mind that surrendering that leverage of fear would lead to untold catastrophe on every level. So it's not coming from a place of not caring, just like warning about the shots wasn't coming from a place of not caring. That was quite the opposite, and this is quite the opposite. I love you guys very much. I pray for those kids. I pray for their families. I pray that we find a solution. I really think we need single point entries, armed guards, and metal detectors, just like at the airport. Anyway, God bless. And that's just my opinion. We should be able to voice our opinions in rational, calm ways. I love you all. Good night.